Hello.
You can come back. Sorry.
Oh, I was still thinking, should I be on this now, or but my cue was later. So.
That's fine. No. That's really fine. Maybe Jonathan can also join us. So let me just keep this.
Hi there.
For a while. Sorry for texting you in 1 a.m. in Singapore time, but when we have speakers from Singapore or also from New York City, it is a little bit like wide time range. So it's my bad. So without further ado, we just heard like Singapore Fintech Authority. So you are close to them. So I would be happy if we can run the ball. So Jonathan and Soumen, again, thank you very much for joining us today. And I would be happy to talk about like innovation in the fintech area, but let's start with introductions. So Soumen, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit for our audience?
Sure. Thanks, Kaan, for having us here, and great to be here too. My name is Soumen Sircar, and I actually have been in Singapore for only 2 years. Prior to Singapore, I was in Hong Kong for over 8 years. I have more or less worked across my career in banks. I took the plunge out of banks into fintechs as a part of my adrenaline rush to find more exciting things to do than wait in banks for things to happen. So I moved to Singapore. I moved from banking into a network scheme, Visa, and from Visa I moved to my current remit, which is working in a fintech. I am the COO here, but that's a title. I do everything from refilling the water cooler to working with my coders to develop programs. Startup life, right? So yeah, so I sit wherever I can, and wherever there's a good network available. And but I've learned a lot, and happy to share my experiences across this next half an hour as to what I see happening and how things are changing so fast in this world.
Thank you very much. We will definitely talk about those. And Jonathan, would you like to talk about a little bit yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Jonathan Vaux. I'm currently General Manager for I2C, which is the world's leading digital issuing payments processor. And I've been in the payments industry over 30 years, over 20 years at Visa, 10 years at American Express, including being head of innovation for Europe for Visa at one point. So delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
I mean, it's a pleasure. I mean, I was just mentioning to you because Visa, we've been working with Visa, and it is really hard to find a fintech person without a background in Visa. So we have a common ground to talk about. But I would be happy to start to talk because of the COVID hit. Nobody was expecting it. How can you expect something like COVID? And my first question is, how do you see any innovation in COVID and post-COVID area? So maybe we can start over there. Would you like to start, Soumen?
Sure. I think COVID led to a few discoveries and a few innovations. The advent of COVID brought SMEs into the limelight. In this part of the world, which is Asia, almost 90% of economies across all countries are basically SME driven, and suddenly everybody started looking at SMEs as a benchmark of countries' performance, and there was a significant amount of investment, so discussion into this SME space to see how they could be protected so that the economy could be protected. So that was one. Two is obviously in terms of the SME's acceptability of technology, the speed of acceptability was not as quick as before. Though Singapore is a fairly digital economy and large parts of Asia are moving fast on digital agenda, I think the advent of COVID accelerated that journey from being a nice to have journey to be a necessary to have ability for a lot of these companies to be able to transact and pay and survive. I think that's that spawned off a few sets of innovative ideas. You've heard Soumen talking about buy now, pay later. I mean, buy now, pay later is not really a new concept. It's a pretty old concept. which basically takes a loan and pay back in installments in many ways. Now, but that has come to the forefront in being, how can we digitize that journey instead of running it as a traditional banking model? Similarly, in the acceptance side, a lot of digitized payments are being accepted now. Again, surprisingly, Asia, not surprisingly, but Asia was a fairly, I would say, heavy dependence on cash and checks as a payment mode. If you leave aside some of the countries like China or Singapore, Hong Kong, a large part of Asia still paid by cash. The more populous countries, I think that is slowly moving into the digital fold. These are the few changes which I have seen in this part of the world.
Yeah, perfect. And Jonathan, would you like to add what is the greatest innovations coming up, and especially after COVID?
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily sure that COVID per se created the innovation. I think what it did was accelerated a huge range of things that, as someone who'd worked in the innovation space, lots of us were talking about and had probably done proofs of concept. So things like order ahead, scan and pay, using virtual cards as in essence check displacement to get funds out to people, get means of payment out much more quickly. So I don't think it was that the innovation in the same way that you saw kind of innovation in vaccines happened in payments, but what we did see, and I've spoken to quite a few people in the industry who said a lot of the stuff that they'd had in their kind of plans for 2+, 3+ years ahead suddenly got pushed to the forefront, and it became accelerated at a speed that I don't think anyone foresaw.
It's also like increased the adoption as well. People were, we had like mobile payments for years and years, like even like Apple or Google Pay. And now, since most of the SMEs doesn't accept cash in UK, so you need to do it. You need to have your card or mobile, whatever. So,
and I think, if you look at in Europe, contactless and stuff like that were really well established anyway. So I think probably other regions had a greater impact than us of kind of accelerating contactless. But I think things like mobile solutions, and I think looking forward, the creation for merchants, for example, to now have to do things like omni-commerce. I think someone mentioned, people using card-based payments for cross-border money send, payroll, all those sort of things became accelerated. And many of the core users, such as the gig economy, became much more to the forefront during this time as well. So there's just a whole range of factors that I think have just exploded the adoption of digital payments and the options in which it's incorporated.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of people having some kind of job insecurity as well. It is different with every country. Like some of them can afford giving out checks to business owners, which should be closed. And for some of them, it was really tough. So like PEs, yoga instructors, everybody wants to open their own shop so they can survive their own life. And some of them actually found out a much better business model than doing hourly based work for themselves. So this is something nice.
I think what was also really interesting was in the fintech world and the API centric world, a lot of the players were able to pivot to those solutions quite quickly and quite easily, comparing that to a lot of the banks and the big banks. So whether there'll still be the tolerance for how long it takes to make changes. And so what I also expect to see is that larger players who probably resisted digitization to the same degree will probably be looking much, much harder now at, we have to improve the time it takes us to develop and roll out features and services and mobile capabilities.
What I generally talk to the corporates that we work with, because basically we set up the open innovation programs, and I try to tell them that this is an insurance. So you need to do it today, because when you are sick, it is going to cost you much more than this, because there will be time limitations. There will be new market where you need to compete as a small player. Right now, you are a big player in terms of like regular banks, but when challenger banks comes, the perspective will change. And in order to cut your own self a slice, you will start as a new kid on the block. So it is a little bit.
To take an analogy, 14 months ago, before COVID really hit, there were merchants who had no online presence or capability.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being a merchant today that had no digital online capability? It would just be unheard of. And so I think it will just change things radically going forward.
Yeah. I would like to talk about now we see a lot of different adoption in different parts of fintech. What do you see the biggest disabler of the industry moving forward? Like regulation is one aspect of it, adoption might be the other one. Soumen, would you like to talk about it a little bit?
Actually, I would say regulators are beaten up for a lot of reasons, but at least in this part of the world, they don't seem to be on the wrong side of the fintech journey. You can always challenge as to the speed at which it's being implemented, but I think in general, regulators have got the feel that technology has to enable a lot of transactional business, simply because it diminishes the cost of maintaining an infrastructure which is currently, I would say, should have been obsolete, but has not been so far because of the general adaptability. Now, again, as a fintech ourselves, and as a fintech which talks to other SMEs, some of them being fintechs, and we are again an SME and a fintech, so it's kind of an interesting mix. What is it that would challenge an adoption of what a solution, right? I think there are two core issues. One is the fact that everybody needs an interoperable system, right? If you look at the larger players, and I'm just giving an example, no disrespect to anybody, but if you look at large ERP platforms, they become very bespoke platforms, right? It solves the problem of that company, but when it comes to speaking to anybody else who has another bespoke ERP platform, there is no way they can talk to each other, right? So they figure out different ways of doing it, be it transactional, be it money, and then there are various ways of finding out how to plug information from that ecosystem to their ecosystem and thereafter. So I think one of the key adaptability issue is the question they ask, what's in it? When an SME asks, what's in it for me, right? How much time do I have to spend? How much money do I have to spend to buy a solution or to take a solution? I think that is pretty much what I call as the ROI puzzle, right? At what point in time will the investment which a company needs to make in any emerging technology or any technology which benefits them, give them that adequate returns? And because ROI is so heavily driven on terms of business and profit, a lot of companies don't understand the ROI in terms of cost savings, right? And therefore, when they look at returns and investment, and there is no cost element in it, or they don't look at the cost element of it, they tend to generalize saying that my cost is not, I have already budgeted for my cost because I've got 3 more folks. And again, in a lot of Asian economies, the pay structures are not as high, right? So you can still leverage or hedge your tech cost against people cost and say that I put in 3 people, I put in X dollars of money, I shall save. Now that thought process is changing. It's not that it's not, and people are getting used to it when you tell them that, hey, those assets, those people who are today a cost center can become a revenue center, right? Retrain them and redeploy them. But that's a journey which some of them have to bite and take into account. And obviously that has to come in the process of the regular business, which they do in any case. So that is obviously has been the challenge. The second thing I would challenge is the speed and scale and how you can do an outreach. Asia is a very diverse economy. Even within the country, there is very, very diverse within the country itself. So you may be talking to, as Nitya was mentioning, 7,000 islands in the Philippines, right? And you don't know which economy or which ecosystem sits on which island and if they have a net connectivity or not. So if you don't have certain of the basic infrastructures working, if you don't have good connectivity, if you don't have platforms or accessibility to handheld devices or laptops, you kind of get stuck after a point, right? Because there is no way you can increase the outreach. And that's what challenges a lot of these in emerging economies. That becomes kind of a challenge: how to reach out to lowest common denominator and how to enable them technologically.
Thank you. Jonathan, would you like to add things on the obstacles of adoptions?
So look, for us, we're a global platform, and we've designed a system that is meant to be kind of, to work seamlessly globally. So while I think it's really, really important that regulation is in place, the challenge is more that those regulations are completely inconsistent and globalized. And so I think we're at this real tipping point where cloud-based thinking and seeing the world as a kind of global economy is really challenged, and particularly in something like payments, by the amount of local variation and compliance that's required on a market by market basis. I mean, let's take Turkey. The requirements to process in Turkey, just for Turkey. And there are a number of markets where you'd go, I absolutely believe that this is really critical and really fundamental and needs to be regulated. The problem is the degree of localization that's now increasingly springing up in an internet world for a whole bunch of reasons is becoming really a barrier, I think, to many fintechs. And when we were talking about crypto, and so how can you scale something that is by design digital when you then have to go through every market's local requirements? And this isn't because of an unwillingness to conform or trying to challenge the status quo. I think it is something that regulators really need to look at as to, are players going to come into our market and operate in our market if we're really prohibiting them and the economics don't make sense to come into that market. So I would say that that's one of the things I think that really concerns me is driving and enabling the efficiencies and growth opportunities that come with cloud-based services due to localized restrictions and compliance challenges.
I mean, I would actually lean on to that answer as well on the perspective of for startups that we have. We have a lot of different startups, right? And we always look for markets to go after. And even, for example, a startup from Turkey, Eastern Europe, it is more convenient to go like Europe, because in Europe, people also have money and they can spend money. But at the end of the day, they try to go to US because EU doesn't work that way. At the end of the day, yes, Europe is a big market, but it's not the same market. Ideally, you can sell a digital product or service someone in Kentucky and also in someone in Mexico, most probably pretty much in a similar usual basics with dollar in terms of currency, and you can have English. Maybe you can add Spanish, then your coverage is like 90% of whole US market. But in EU, yes, a lot of people speak English, that's fine. But again, we have Euro, but still country by country, you have GDPR. There are similar differences. In Turkey, for example, we have separate regulation for money, plus we have something else. So it makes it really harder to scale things. You need to think about customization, localization, much harder than you would do in a broader market. For example, maybe like China or US. I don't know, Soumen, what do you think about the rest of APAC region? Because APAC is really different as well. Like Singapore is a small island, which has a lot of things that we done, but Philippines, Malaysia.
No, look, you're spot on, right? In Asia, if you look at the width of, or the expanse of Asia, it starts from Japan and ends up in, we can call Australia as part of Asia. We call it Asia Pacific, to make it easy. And every country has a little set of rules which are different from the other, or a broad set of rules, call it what you may. China has its own ecosystem, as does India. Currencies are restricted in most countries in Asia because they are not freely transferable. There's restriction on capital movement of funds. And there are enough regulations which will deter even the strong-hearted in saying that, should I come from, I don't know, from Turkey and set up a shop in China? It's not going to happen. Right? It's not easy. So therefore, there has been a lot of homebred fintechs who have developed and created ecosystem within each country to facilitate what they would like, facilitate the B2C or the B2B business both together, and trying to make that ecosystem work. Now, are they at scale today? If you ask me, I would say not yet. Again, you brought the example of Singapore, great market, but it's 5.6 million people, right? That's probably half a city in India, right? With 1.3 billion people, right? Now, but the accessibility of this 5.6 million people, I mean, there are 5.4 million mobile devices in Singapore, right? So the very highly likely everybody has one, right? And those who don't have one are probably not registered. But so now in that ecosystem, to create a fintech environment and facilitate payment is, I would say, not challenging. But the moment you move into markets like Philippines, Indonesia, where the mobile penetration, product penetration, infrastructure is not to the standard you would expect countries, you obviously have some other challenges. So a lot of that is solved by feet on street, or the hybrid model, as I call it, between a traditional model and technology merging, wherein certain processes can be run by technology, but finally the people outreach has to be done by people themselves. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of environment you see in this part of the world.
I mean, I want to like put a few thoughts on like millennials as well, maybe a little bit on blockchain, because I think Jonathan has a few things to talk about, at least like Visa's settlement on cryptocurrencies, which was interesting. I mean, we got paid as Hackquarters in 2018, first time in history for us in cryptocurrencies. And this year, personally, as an investor, I invested in a company while using USDC, and the company was in US, and which is an interesting something for me as well. It's moving forward. Definitely, there is adoption. Countries like Turkey, there are some kind of economic instabilities. You see a lot of adoption. You see it in Latin America as well, because like there are different aspects of it, but still, this is something coming to our lives. So, Jonathan, would you like to talk about like the initial settlement with Visa and USDC?
Well, no, I mean, yes. I mean, I think it's really interesting in that certainly when I was at Visa, we looked at blockchain and cryptocurrencies closely, and I would often get asked my opinion, and my opinion would be that it was really interesting technology that needed some time to mature. And I think what we're getting to is a position where that technology is starting to scale and become mature, where there's an acceptance of the importance of it. And so I think as long as you have volatility in currency, that's not great for some of the use cases. But we're now starting to see, firstly, people converting from coin to stable currency, and then but now yesterday was a milestone with a client of ours, crypto.com, and a very close partner, Visa. So I think we're now starting to see the emergence, and I compared it a lot to digital music. So I'm old enough to remember when you had Napster and you know, people were downloading bogus, you know, files, and it really took, and I used to say the same about crypto, which is I think it needed legitimization and some structure around it, and it would take off. And I think we're at that point now where in the next few years, there's a recognition of the role and the use cases that it can play and where it can add value. And increasingly, I think you're going to see more widespread adoption. I suspect, and this comes on to your millennial point, there is probably going to be a difference in comfort level early days between younger generations and older generations, and an understanding in the same way that, you know, a lot of adoption of, you know, iPads and tablets, if you know, was straight away for younger people, and has taken time for some of the older generation. But there's no question in my mind, and we've been at the forefront at I2C of a lot of crypto solutions and providers, which is that it's now hit the point where it's going to become mainstream. The speed and the adoption will be interesting to watch, but I think that the question of whether it would go mainstream has now been answered. How quickly and the scale of adoption will be interesting to watch in the coming years.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, for just moving to millennials, I would just share a few things. Like Twitch is really incredible thing, right? A lot of gamers are doing their sessions over there. People are so happy to give tips for like people who are streaming it. I do play mobile games. I watch it on YouTube most of the time because I do it on the TV when I'm laying down after the work. But basically in the stream, you see like $5, $10 just coming to this guy's PC, and I really relate to it because it helps me a lot. So basically, somebody is trying to work their ass off to do one, let's say, fight in a mobile game, because it would cost you either time, maybe money in the game, and he just tries to work you through that. So there is a value for sure, and people are.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because you raised a question in advance around what do I think a payment looks like in the future.
Yeah.
Well, I think when I first started, payment was cash, check, or card, and they were products. Cash, check, or card.
Exactly.
Now, and I was on a panel last week talking about buy now, pay later, and I was saying to the people, guys, you don't understand this. What you're now seeing, buy now, pay later, is a feature embedded into the merchant's proposition to win and acquire customers, and so therefore there's not going to be anything like a single form of payment. It's going to be payment is a feature that needs to be configured to support all these different user experiences. So your example of gaming, I don't want to step out of a gaming transaction and do strong authentication. I want a different model. And tips and stuff. So I think it's going to be really interesting as how payments become a digital feature of a wide range of emerging use cases and not the fairly rigid products that they used to be. So how you pay and how you settle become optional kind of configuration choices. And I think it's going to be really exciting what goes on in the next few years.
I mean, this is also like what Soumen also mentioned on the thing. Like right now, all innovation is kind of blurred. You don't see banks, you don't see big tech companies, you don't see gaming companies. So everybody has an aspect of it. And this is what we were discussing in terms of fintech. Starbucks was one of the most used fintech products because millions of people were spending on average like $150 using the app itself because they are like widely spread. So basically, if they try to sell credits, I think people will buy it. Or if they have any kind of different models, they can use it. So does it make them banks? It doesn't, but it makes them larger than many banks in the world. So it's interesting.
But a lot of that credit isn't really credit.
Yeah.
It's me saying, actually, I know you're going to get paid tomorrow because you're a regular customer and I value you. I'll give you access to funds a day early. Sure. So yes, it's credit, but it's not lending in the way that many people think
financial institutions.
Or no. So I think there's a, as I said, with credit, there's a mindset change that I think is required to think through, and again, a lot of it is being led by merchants, not by banks, who I think are really under a lot of pressure post-COVID to make sure they have
liquidity, cash on hand,
relationship and access and engagement with their customer base.
Yeah. I mean, there was this campaign in London, Buy It Forward, for the SMEs that you like, because they are closed. So if you want to give them money early on, there is a really nice bakery in Bracknell called Bread by Bike. We are happy to give them money because we are going to buy their bread anyway, and I want them to be sustained. So it was an interesting crowdfunding thing. So Soumen, actually, before going to you, I would like to remind people on chat, we send an NPS for this event, especially for our audience. If you want to add anything that you have in mind, if you can give us some kind of remarks, how do you feel about this event? Because we are closing in a few minutes. So Soumen, what do you think about millennials and their behavior? So what we are going to see in terms of like payment? Because Jonathan already put some thoughts on it in terms of understanding payment as kind of a feature for a business requirement.
Sure. Again, I'm probably as old as Jonathan. I've seen through the age when Walkman existed and didn't exist. So The typewriters moved from physical to electronic, and they disappeared to word processing, and then they disappeared to voice activated notes. So, I mean, honestly, if you look at crystal ball today, it's pretty easy to see what can come through. But I'm rest assured, I don't think any millennial wants to do any of the financial transactions which we have done in our younger days, right? And felt excited about it. Look, I still remember my first day when I opened a bank account was kind of a really exciting day for me. Today, I don't go to the bank to open an account. I open an account online. I haven't seen a checkbook for few years. I've forgotten how to sign, honestly. I haven't signed a document for many years. So, I mean, the way you look at it, I would say most of the millennials would love to have a technology-enabled life style. I would, if I limit myself to the exact payment space, I think basically they would like to pay as far as possible electronically, right? I don't see them carrying wallets. I don't see them carrying credit cards for that matter. I mean, if you look at credit cards, in theory, it's a 16-digit number, right, with certain other credentials in it. Why do you need a physical plastic sitting in your card, and that to 3 of them, right? Why do you need a credit card when you can call for a virtual card and make a payment? Why do you need a number when you can? I mean, you can keep arguing, and I think the industry is thinking along those lines. I would also assume, not assume, I'm pretty sure that the world will move a bit differently when it comes to adapting technology, just because of the way we are organized here, right? The adaptability, Jonathan mentioned, the regulations have little tweaks everywhere. Most of Asia controls their currency, so therefore cryptocurrency becomes an issue because they can't control the currency because digital, and they want to maintain parity. There is socio-economic, political balances to be maintained when you're looking at a lot of these things, right? So, but I would assume, and I don't remember which US president said that one fine day a millennial would be a US president, right? And that's true for every country, right? I mean, at one point in time, a millennial will rule and govern and run the country. And I think that transition, which probably took in my life 40 years to come to the stage today, will be exponentially shortened to around 3 to 5 years. So I talk to myself, I need to learn a lot of stuff in terms of how to adapt to this new technology. If you look at the demographic population of Asia, they are on the curve is not against the curve is not in their favor, right? The demographic problem. Some of the countries, Philippines, India, etc., have a large young population coming into the mainstream. A lot of the more mature countries, Japan, Korea, are moving to the other side. A lot of the demographic population is not in their favor. Mm-hmm. And therefore, adaptability, I believe, will work in most of the emerging economies or the young demograph than the senior citizen like me. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting phase to be in. And in Singapore, there is this phrase which is called a sandwich generation. So we are part of the sandwich generation, which is between transitioning from the old to the new, and we're getting squeezed on both sides. So that's how I see myself. So yeah, that's my take. I would love to walk without a wallet. I'd love to walk with a wearable device which can talk, speak, pay, and take care of my lifestyle. And that's how I see the millennials would expect nothing less.
I mean, I'm sure that like Jonathan also, we are on the optimist side. I mean, I believe that technology is improving our lives with everything they also say. Jonathan?
I also don't think it's purely technology. I mean, there's a huge bunch of, I think, societal changes as well that are happening. So, you know, the propensity to own a home, the likelihood to have a long-term job. And so I think it's a combination of technology, absolutely. But also, you know, many financial products today, like credit scoring models, and you know, a lot of these things don't actually really reflect the way that young people are likely to want to live their lives going forward. So, you know, probably, you know, I worked 20 years at Visa. I doubt there's many people going forward. No. 20 years careers at a single company. You know, people have, you know, they work for different reasons and different outcomes. And so I think it seems actually, it absolutely is technological and technological comfort. But I also think recognizing, we've just gone through a pandemic, which means the propensity to work at home is probably going to be exponentially higher than it was 2 years ago.
Definitely.
So I think it's interesting how many of these other things have an influence on the payment instruments that we choose to use, whether we're as individuals. The likelihood I'm, probably more likely to have small business or set up my own business than probably people were 20 years ago. So I think there's so many different factors moving at the same time. It'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
I mean, thank you very much. I really appreciated everything. Honestly, I can talk hours with you, but I think we need to close the session. So if you have any remarks by closing about you, about how you see future. So Soumen, would you like to add your final thoughts so we can close the event and the panel?
Now, thanks, Kaan. Look, the world is an imperfect place. I don't think it'll ever become perfect. But I think the opportunities today are amazing. Technology has enabled it. It has to live within a geopolitical, social milieu. A lot of practices and habits have to change. Jonathan alluded to some on the banking side, and I've been in banks, and I know about hundreds and thousands of the processes have to change completely to get here to the real world, to the emerging world, right? And I don't think they are yet ready in large parts of the world. I think there has to be a significant amount of acceleration happening in various institutions, not only financial, to make that happen. But next 5 to 10 years, I think will be really interesting. And I'm at that stage in life where I can say I'm looking forward to it.
Great to hear. Jonathan?
Thank you. I think, look, if going through the pandemic has shown anything, it's shown that probably nothing is as predictable as we'd like to think it is. And I suspect that over the next 2-3 years, we're going to see, huge amounts of change, of innovation in the way people buy, the way people shop, and I think over time, the way people bank. So I think the need for agility and flexibility to respond to the changes that are going to be happening is going to be absolutely critical going forward. And I'm fascinated to see how it all plays out.
I mean, I hope we will be agile as possible. But I mean, humans existed for like 10,000 years. So I'm sure that we will find a way if we don't have another meteorite hitting on Earth. Even then, I'm sure that we will find a way. I really enjoyed this panel as well. I would be happy. I mean, I thank you again to participating for this panel. I hope we will see each other again.